welcome to the end of the first quarter of 2024, and we're gonna tier rank all of the books I read starting in January all the way through March today. So the tier ranking for these books is mostly the same as all the books I tier ranked in 2023, but I added two categories. I have doesn't live up to series quality standards and don't like. I'm hoping these two new additions will help make it easier for me to rank books going forward. Starting with An Appetite for Innocence by Lucinda Berry, about a serial killer who abducts young girls, and he has an obsession with taking their virginity and kind of like playing house with them when he wants and leaving them in the basement below. The girls escape. That's not a spoiler, that's part of the story. We're trying to figure out exactly what happened and trying to make sure that this guy gets caught and goes away for good. Overall, I did like this story and the writing style, so I'm going to put it in I had a good time. It doesn't make it into read this now, mostly because I think it's going to be triggering for a lot of people, and because it's kind of like your stereotypical crime fiction, so even though it's doing a lot of things very well and I had a lot of fun, it's not something I'd recommend for everyone. Next is At the Bottom of New Lake by Sonia Larson. I think Sonia Larson is going to be one of my favorite authors I've found in 2024. This story is just so beautifully written. It's like such a compact little novella. It's delivering such a strong punch in so many different little intersectionality elements. It's about this young school-age girl who seems to have a crush on another girl. She's awkward, she's not really fitting in, and her hobby is exploring the bottom of this lake where it looks like it flooded over its boundaries and consumed the homes that were in the surrounding border area. All of this would be fine, but apparently the teacher catches them doing it and it really offends her because she was one of the people who used to live in those homes and those were her friends. And for her, this is like a tragic mourning incident and not like a discovery. Stuff kind of unwinds from there with a bunch of complicated elements involved. For me, this is definitely going to go into read this now. I really think everyone should give it a try because it's so short. Even if you hated it, I feel like it's more accessible than normal. And it's got an audio version as well because it is one of those Amazon original reads. Next is going to be Boca Raton by Lauren Groff. And this one I'm actually going to have a very hard time putting into any of these categories. On one side, if I choose to look at this from the perspective of it being in the warmer collection and climate changing us all as being the main theme, I do not like the messaging and implications of this story, and that's where this one would go. But if I'm just looking at this as a standalone piece, then I really like the journey our protagonist goes from like a solid sanity position to a slow unraveling and loss of the thread, as so to speak. I like those stories where we sort of examine people's unraveling and what kind of is the catalyst for what their obsession is. I think based off of this chart, I didn't have a good time when I was reading it because there were so many implications that were like,
just don't worry about climate change, bro.
And I was reading it specifically in the lens of a climate change, global warming kind of story. So I think it has to go, and I don't like it just based off of the categories. But no, that's not entirely true. Next is The Candles Are Burning by Veronica G. Henry. This is a story set in Savannah, Georgia in, I believe, the 1950s. And it's got a black couple with a young daughter kind of discussing whether they're going to stay in Savannah or move up north where there are more opportunities. The wife gives in, and as she agrees to go with him, the husband dies in front of her. And during that death, she has some kind of like supernatural experience. Like she kind of knew about the death just a little bit beforehand, or like this has awakened some kind of latent power in her family line in her. So then the story transforms into one that's dealing with her grief over the loss of her husband, her figuring out what she's supposed to do so she and her child can continue to thrive, and also her coming to terms with this ancestral power, what she has, what she can do, and maybe what this means for her going forward. I do think at its novella length is a little too short to tie up all of the elements that it was kind of thrown at us, and generally I think Veronica G. Henry does better in a long format versus a short story. I think I'm going to end up putting it in I Had a Good Time, mostly because I did like the story. Next is going to be Controller by Jesse Kellerman. I hated this book. It's the first and only book in those Amazon original series collections that I didn't finish. Going right into Not If You Were the Last Book on Earth. I thought the horror collection I had read from Amazon Originals was going to be the winner for the worst stories in it, but it looks like the warmer collection has it beat by a mile. Next is going to be Crimson Skies by Jamie and Eve, and this one's pretty simple. It's going in the I Had a Good Time category. It borders worse on generic but fine, because I don't know that any of the elements Jamie and Eve used are that original, and I don't think she put the pieces together in a very unique way. The love interest mix-up that goes on where originally Morgan thought she was going to be with Drager and she ends up being with Zach, and these two guys are twins, and the reason she felt pulled into Drager's world is because Drager and Zach have a twin connection, and she could like vaguely feel that, and Drager could also vaguely feel that through their twin connection. That was unique and gross and icky. It really reminded me of Edgar Allan Poe's like obsession with family and romance. Gave me major ick vibes, which was a funny thing to experience in something that's supposed to be like a romantic-y style story. Like, it's not supposed to be horrific. It's not supposed to be giving these lurid, icky details. We're supposed to be like falling in love and coming to see each other's side of the story and that kind of thing. If we're talking about its good qualities, I do really think, except for the Drager-Zach twin bond thing, the Zach and Morgan relationship they built here in book 2 is pretty good. I don't mind the Fae world or the major conflict going on here. I think it's resolved pretty well, although it's drug out at the end when I think the solution was obvious. You gotta do what you gotta do to get those Kindle Unlimited page flips, right? Next is gonna be Easter and the Hare. I'm gonna go ahead and drop this into generic, but fine. I guess it's not technically super generic because it is like a pagan springtime story with ideas for different things you could do with kids to celebrate spring, different foods and stuff, and I'm just not sure there's a lot of those on the market. But as far as like what it was presenting to me, it ended up being probably it's cute but not serving anything special. Next is going to be Exploring Nature. I think I accidentally left this one out of my March reading wrap up. This is a kids activity book with a bunch of different activities you could do with kids outdoors so they could learn more about the environment, the world around them. I love kids activities books, and I'm especially a huge fan of them when they're meant both for the guardian and for the child. Like, the guardian probably needs to plan and prep and get a lot of the stuff together for some of these activities, but you could definitely hand this off to a child and they could read through it, and it's got like little pictures and warnings and extra information for them. I probably also have a soft spot for this because as a kid I loved this kind of book, so it was just like a really fun nostalgic thing combined with like what great activities they'd be for a whole family. It's going at the top of the charts. Next is going to be Falls the Shadow by Skip Horak. Going into Don't Remember. I do vaguely remember it because it hasn't been that long, but like the sharpness of the details is already blurring for me, and that's never a great sign. Next is going to be Halloween Slaughter. The Halloween Slaughter doesn't live up to the series quality. I know it's the second in a 3-book series and I haven't read the third book, so maybe this is actually the standard. But the first one, just so good. I had so much fun, and all these like different elements were coming together and working really well. And Halloween Slaughter doesn't have as many elements. They're not really working hand in hand as well as they could be. I felt like things were a little bit slow and tedious at some points, and the main event, which is supposed to be the killer coming to a Halloween party and killing everyone, was not anywhere near as exciting as I felt like it could have been. Also, there were just less kills in this story in general. Like, I think the first book, the kids going to the remote cabin, there were a lot more of them than there are in this one, but I could just be misremembering that. Next is going to be Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela V. Davis. This is going to go into the Read This Now category. I talked about it a little bit in my January review, but certainly I didn't enjoy reading this nonfiction book necessarily because it's very heavy topic and it's delivered in a way that's kind of hard for me personally to take in. But I think it's really important that we do talk about the various subjects going on in these essays and speeches. Maybe it would have been better for me personally to like have listened to it versus read it, but I think it's important that we're all consuming it and thinking about it and kind of like taking this information in. Next is going to be House Omega by Roxy Collins. I'm really tempted to put this and read this now because it is a Why Choose Omegaverse story that features a beta instead of the alphas and omegas, and it's got like a very satisfying emotional arc, and everyone has great chemistry, and they all get their own moment to like actually create a relationship. Really what's holding me back from putting it all the way at the top is that Omegaverse is so niche, and then on top of that, Why Choose romances are even more niche. I think I'm gonna just have to leave it, and I had a good time. But if you like Omegaverse, if you like Why Choose, this one is the one for you. Next is Mama, What's a Witch? And this is a kid's picture book. I read this past March. It was cute. I think it ends up going in generic but fine. The pictures are really pretty pretty. The prose have like a nursery rhyme element to them that's nice, and there's like pretty much single lines across a page. So I think it's perfect for like a younger audience. Next is Out of the Mirror Darkness by Garth Nix. It's part of the Into Shadow Amazon Originals collection. I think I'm gonna put it in I Had a Good Time. I feel like it should be a little bit lower than that because I have so many like great I Had a Good Time ones in here. I think how I'll handle that is at the end I'll go order these a little bit better. Next is Pack of Lies by Olivia Lewine. This one's hard. Generally speaking, I guess I had a good time with it, but it was way too long and I did get bored. Unfortunately or fortunately, the idea here is pretty unique, having an Omega who's been captured and is being experimented on in a facility, and as a result, she doesn't really have a sense of smell anymore. Alphas break into the facility to like break up the bad guys, and they meet her and they're her scent match. Except the alphas know that and she doesn't, and because she's been treated really badly, like tortured and experimented on, she doesn't necessarily trust these guys or like them or want to go with them. And like exploring what it means to have a scent match when half of the party can't do the smelling thing is interesting. And then they keep it interesting past when it normally would have been, because this group of alphas actually already has an Omega back home, and for whatever reasons they decide to keep their like family life a secret from her for quite a while. When she finds out, it's like a little bit of a betrayal and also a little bit of like a relief, and how that Omega like deals with this new Omega who's a scent match is quite interesting. All of that premise right there, 100% though, is very unique. Not anything even kind of like something else I've read in the Alpha Omega verse before. As far as doesn't live up to the series quality, this is a book from the Poison verse. I read book 1 and then I jumped over here to book 3 because a lot of these are standalones. It more or less fits. I'd say this one is probably a little bit better than the first one, but like as far as the concept of setting up pretty unique and dark premises, I think this series is quite interesting. I guess it's gonna have to go into I Had a Good Time, and when I reorganize it, it will have to go lower on the list. Next is gonna be Persephone by Lev Grossman. This one's generic but fine. It's a superhero coming of age, kind of like X-Men style narrative. It wasn't bad, it wasn't good, it just exists. Next is gonna be Rabid by Raven Kennedy and Ivy Asher. I think this one's also going in the generic but fine category. It's got a little bit of that basic like I'm the one werewolf shifter that everyone picks on vibe going on. I do think how the relationship ends up forming between her and one of the alphas in this rejected pack, and the whole concept of the rejected pack, is a little bit unique, but it's not quite doing enough to really elevate it much further than this. And the next one is actually a novel I read in January that was published by St. Martin's Press, and due to the boycott I won't be naming it publicly or speaking too much about summary details. I loved this story. I actually have a standalone review that I created and filmed for it, and I'm kind of frustrated that I can't talk about it or show the cover or do more with it right now. As far as rating it goes, I think it would go into the I Had a Good Time category, and I won't specify any more than that, nor will I be moving it up and down the tier list. Next is going to be Teaching of the Great Outdoors. This is another one of those picture books I picked up in March. Going into the generic but fine, it's probably a little bit better than generic but fine. Personally, I had a good time reading it, but when I'm thinking about it as a picture book, I find some of the wording to be a little bit awkward, and the length of sentences and the amount of sentences on page is just a little too much, I think, for a kid's picture book. Maybe it's better for like an older kid who still enjoys picture books. My problem there is I think the messaging would be best for a slightly younger audience. The Candles Are Burning, this somehow got duplicated. Next is The Elvis Room by Stephen Graham Jones. I did not like this entry. Next is The Garden by Tony Champion Ademi. Gonna go Not If You Were the Last Book on Earth. I'm gonna put it a little higher than Controller. The deal with this one is that it has a great little like seed of something that could have been great in it, but its execution and what's actually on page is so disappointing and isn't living up to the potential. It's probably closer, like realistically, either to a generic but fine, or like a don't like, or maybe even doesn't live up to the series. However, it just disappoints so much. Next is going to be The Hillside by Jane Smiley. This one doesn't live up to the series quality. The Amazon Warmer collection really delivered to me. It had 2 books I loved loved. Of course, it had 2 books I didn't like, and then it has 1 book that I liked but probably wouldn't necessarily recommend to other people. And then there's the Hillside. And the Hillside is standing out here kind of awkwardly on its own because there were some elements that I thought could be interesting that didn't really develop well. There's this core something or other that I think is kind of special. And then there's a question about whether or not a lot of this was borrowed from indigenous mythology and whether or not Jane Smiley should have done that, especially based off of where the story goes. And for me, because there are so many questions it's not really executing on, it just is not living up to the series. Even the things that were bad in some ways at least executed on theme and did so with some level of satisfaction. This one leaves you kind of like wandering away, and especially where it's the last book in the collection, it's very like an ambiguous, awkward, sad kind of note, maybe even implying like that humanity doesn't or shouldn't exist on Earth anymore. Next is going to be The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. I'm gonna put it in generic but fine. I bet it was quite good when it came out and like very unique, especially on the Are No Sleep Reddit forum, but as it stands in its current incarnation with all the other books that I've read on this sort of like theming, it's executing well enough, but it's not doing anything special that's really bringing it out or making it stand out. Next is going to be The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Hara. I loved this. It was amazing. You should read this now. Six Deaths of the Saint has like a lot of very standard medieval fantasy elements, but the pieces are doing different, unique, interesting ways. And Alex E. Hara has like a very nice, like almost hypnotic fairy tale tone of voice happening here. I just thought it was done expertly. It was delivering something interesting and new. It's only like 45 minutes, maybe an hour to listen to it. Next is going to be The Way the World Ends by Jess Walter. I liked this one. I had a good time. Not much more to it, really. Next will be There's No Place Like Home by Eden LaPlucky. I loved this one. It's tied for my favorite in the Warmer collection, and it's definitely going into read this now. Granted, I love dystopian, climate catastrophe kind of fiction, but I really think the examination here about a child who might be the last generation of humans born on Earth, trying to figure out her place in a family that's kind of fallen apart after the suicide of her father. All of those fun earmarks of like the dystopian, what are we doing? How are we living in this world when everything has gone bad? But it also has like that very human, relatable element. Next is going to be The Three Crows magazine. I had a good time. These stories were short, they were quick. That was a fun little like filler treat for me. Next is Undercover by Tamsin Muir. I'm going to put this one in doesn't live up to the series quality. This is another one of the Into Shadow collection. I liked this story. In fact, I think I might have liked it more than Out of the Mirror Darkness, all things considered. However, there's this element in it that's just not quite polished. Like, it throws you into a world without giving you a lot of world building, which makes sense and generally I like. But in this story, I felt like kind of lost and like scrambling all the time. And I just think the execution of it was a little bit rough. We Ate the Dark by Mallory Pearson. I think I'm going to drop it in generic but fine. I hesitate to do that because there are several elements in it that I think are unique and make it stand out. The problem is I can't put it in I had a good time. It just is a debut novel, and there are some elements that make it very obvious that this was a first attempt for this author. Next is We Have Summoned by Judith Sonnet. I'm gonna drop it into Don't Remember. I do technically remember the parts that I read in this story, like what happened in them, but it's pretty vague, and I DNF'd it pretty early in, so it's not like 100% fair for me to say that I didn't like it, because I think maybe if I had been in a different mood, I'd have been more interested. And then last is gonna be What the Dead Know by Nhi Vo. I love this. We're gonna drop it into read this now. What the Dead Know is set in like a 1920s America where there happens to be magic. We're doing like the spiritualist sham moment, except it turns out in this case the seance isn't quite so much of a fake as they wanted it to be. And then we're doing like a little bit of mystery sleuthing. We're really exploring this one woman's vulnerability and like desire to live and pull through the situation she's enduring. It's doing a lot, and I think it might actually be more for a niche audience than I'm giving it credit for, because I love the 1920s spiritualism movement. But again, here's the thing. 40, 50-minute read. So even if you get into it and you're like,
This is definitely not for me.
you really haven't wasted a lot of time, even if you're one of those people who can't put books down. So now that we have put all of the books on the tier list, I'm gonna rearrange it a little bit to be more accurate and like what I think goes where. So I'm gonna put Freedom is a Constant Struggle in the back burner because I didn't like it, and I feel a little bit silly making people read something I didn't like. And Exploring Nature is gonna go a little bit further back too. I have some strong contenders here. I think Six Deaths of the Saint is going first, and then there's No Place Like Home because it's so approachable. I'm a little bit torn. The Six Deaths of the Saint, part of what I like is the artistry of it, so I'm wondering if that artistic level is off-putting for people and if maybe I should be rearranging. But I think everyone should experience something that's like part of its charm is the artistic nature of it. If you're gonna experience something that's kind of like artsy, at least this isn't very long if it ends up not being for you. So this St. Martin's Press thing is going to the back. I think Crimson Skies is going right behind. I think I'm gonna put Out of the Mirror Darkness behind that and The Way the World Ends behind that. And my reasoning here is Crimson Skies is like right on the line of going into I Had a Good Time. Out of the Mirror Darkness is fun for what it is, but it's just not that much of anything. The Way the World Ends I liked, but I related to it in a very specific way, and I don't know if that's fair for me to like put so high up on the list otherwise. Oh, Pack of Lies, You Exist. I liked Pack of Lies. It was so long, and by the time I got maybe halfway through it, I was feeling that length sort of squander some of the charity I give it for its interesting ideas. Appetite for Innocence. You're gonna go back here. My thinking on Appetite for Innocence going farther back is it is like a standard serial killer sort of story. I liked it. I think it's really well done, and I think it's giving like some unique perspective, but it's still at the end of the day is what it is. I think I'm actually gonna bring Three Crows to the top, House of Megan next, and then The Candles Are Burning. Generic, but fine. Way the Dark, you can go to the top because you're not really generic. Rabid and Persephone are definitely at the bottom. I think I'm gonna let these two picture books go up, and I'm gonna move this guy up because I really liked this, even though I don't think it's quite right for younger readers. The Patient was supposed to be up here in generic, but fine, I'm going to put it right here in between. And now we're going to move into Doesn't Live Up to Series Quality. I'm going to go here because Undercover is a good story and the Hillside I think is not. Don't like. I'm going to put the Elvis Room a little bit higher than Boca Raton. Don't remember. That looks right. And Not If You're the Last Book on Earth I already decided I liked like that. So this is going to be the tier list of everything I read from January to March this year so far. What were your favorite books? Tell me about them in the comments down below. And if you got this far and you don't have anything else to comment, leave me a book stash in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading. Bye!